Have you kept up with the Cruiserweight Super Series at all?
It's really good.
That's like,
yeah, I didn't watch the last one, but yeah, it's really good.
You probably would enjoy watching it. Do you know Murat Gassiev?
Yeah, he's awesome.
Well, do you want spoilers for what happened?
I know he knocked the guy out through the ropes, right?
Yeah, 12th round. He just found a home for his left uppercut and just kept lacing it through Dorticos's gloves and knocked him out with a huge counter left hook and then like 2 more unnecessary knockdowns in the 12th. But like the difference in, it's not just the production. I don't know. It's the production's part of it, but those really feel momentous, those fights. And you have the whole narrative built in of the tournament, like, here are these world champions all slowly but surely working their ways towards one another. It just feels like something that matters. It's not like, where you have, like, Jacare Souza, legitimately one of the top 5 middleweights in the world, and he's fighting, and it just doesn't feel like it means anything. It's like,
well, I think the boxing is kind of past the point. Okay, so boxing hit a point a few years back where it was where the UFC is now, where there was such an explosion of belts, and belts had been thoroughly devalued, and like you stuck a belt on anything because you wanted it to be a 12-round fight, or because you wanted a headliner or whatever. And so people realized that belts didn't mean anything, and there was no real differentiation in the product aside from like superstars, right? Well, now boxing, I think, has kind of gotten past that, where people realize that belts are not especially meaningful. So what you need are narratives. What you need is kind of an investment in the very elite upper crust of the sport. Not everything has to be everything. You can just have a thing that's a thing, and that's okay.
Yeah.
You can just have an event that's an event, and it can be fun or it can not be fun or whatever. It doesn't reflect on the product as a whole. But in boxing, there is no single overarching brand. So every one of those little events that maybe a fight isn't fun or it like absolutely doesn't matter, that's not a reflection on the brand as a whole, in the way that a shitty Fight Pass card that nobody enjoys is a reflection on the whole UFC brand. Yeah.
I think the UFC monopoly, you could argue, is just overall bad for the sport of MMA.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the audience for MMA is declining in general because Bellator's numbers are down too.
Yeah.
And so I just think there are fewer people, at least in the U.S., watching MMA these days, but it doesn't have to be as bad as it is.
No, and of course not. Why would it have to be this bad?
Well, I mean, there's always going to be a tendency to say that we live in the best of all possible worlds or whatever, and like these things are inevitable, and like they're not inevitable. They're the product of choices that the UFC has made for quite some time.
Yeah. I was hoping for Professor Pangloss, but I got Professor Patrick Wyman instead.
You did.
To break my heart with his realism.
I've been accused of being a grump.
Can't imagine why.
Yes.
Hello and welcome to Heavy Hands Pivot Edition. I'm your host, Connor Ruebusch, now officially a football expert. And joining me is fellow football expert, Dr. Patrick Wyman. We're not talking about MMA anymore on Heavy Hands. Pat, this is now a Super Bowl-only show. So please, your thoughts on Tom Brady's cool jacket.
Looked amazing. Looked like a guy who belonged on a runway at Paris Fashion Week. Really outstanding. I liked the way he moved his shoulders in that jacket. I thought the sunglasses were a nice compliment. Mm-hmm. His hairline looking real good. Those plugs are working for him.
Man, that was a throwaway joke introduction, but you really gave me the full Monty on Tom Brady's appearance. I appreciate that.
That's the most attention that I paid to anything related to the game.
You are an analyst to your core, Pat. You just can't. I ask you a question for analysis. You give me the best analysis you possibly can, and I appreciate
What kind of analyst would I be if I didn't immediately try to find fault or amusement with something in this world?
Well, speaking of amusement, hopefully there will be some of that in store at UFC 221, which yes, is actually the main topic of our show today. The main event of UFC 221, of course, is genuinely fascinating. I'm still a little heartbroken that this is no longer Robert Whittaker defending his title against Luke Rockhold, but Yoel Romero versus Luke Rockhold is a fight I have wanted to see for a very long time anyway. It's a fantastic matchup. One of those, there's just sort of this small group at the top of middleweight where any fights between them feel like anything could happen. Rockhold, Weidman, Romero, Whittaker, and Jacare are just like this phenomenally competitive, tightly competitive bunch of guys. And so I'm down for Romero versus Rockhold, and that's what we're going to talk about on today's show. Before getting into a little bit of the rest of that card, I think as of now we know we're going to talk about Hunt versus Blades. That's the co-main event. We're going to talk about Israel Adesanya, who is making his UFC debut on the Fox Sports 1 prelims. We're also going to talk about one of our favorite up-and-comers, Alexander Volkanovski, who has a potentially tough fight in his hands with Jeremy Kennedy, also on the prelims. And then at the end of today's show, we are going to take what time we have remaining to talk about UFC Belang, which I think is how they were pronouncing it on the actual broadcast, and its main event of Machida versus Eric Anders. Let's go ahead and get right in to the main event of 221. That's the one we really care about. That's the one that everyone's excited about. Yoel Romero versus Luke Rockhold. General take on the matchup, my friend.
I have no idea what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I think in large part it's because neither of these guys has good analogs in terms of how the other guy has fought them. Mm-hmm. Like Rockhold will be the biggest guy that Romero has ever fought by a wide margin. He's going to be the tallest, longest, best mover in space, I think. Best combination of length and movement in space that Romero's ever fought. Mm-hmm. Conversely, Rockhold has never fought a wrestler who's anything like Romero. He's never fought an athlete who's anything like Romero in terms of explosiveness and fluidity. Never fought anybody as unpredictable as him.
Yep. The closest on some of those was probably Jacare when he was younger, way back in 2011. Mm-hmm. But it's been a while, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and like 2017, 2018 Romero is a lot different fighter than 2011 Jacare was.
By far, yeah.
Like, and I mean, 2018 Jacare is a much different fighter than 2011 Jacare was, for that matter.
Sure.
I went back. I was struck when watching the tape of each of these guys' last couple of fights by how good they are. Like, I mean, that's a weird thing to say, but I really think like middleweight gets ragged on a little bit because it's not a very deep division, and once you get outside the top 8 or so, it's guys maybe are just not that good. Yeah. But at the very top, the things that Romero was doing against Robert Whittaker and what Whittaker was doing to stop him was as good as anything you will ever see in this sport. Rockhold against Dave Branch. Dave Branch looked real good. I thought at the time it was kind of Rockhold looked not great. Branch looked really good. Rockhold had to like fight through against a kind of a tough dude to figure out how he was going to deal with that. Mm-hmm. I thought like Romero's entries on his takedowns against Robert Whittaker were some of the craziest, best things, best timing, best entries, best setups I think I've ever seen in MMA. They were insane. He went counter left hand to the body, immediate level change, chained together 3 takedowns, and somehow Whittaker still managed to stuff them. Yeah, like it was. The level of skill involved on both sides of that was insane. I thought against Branch, I thought Rockhold's footwork looked a lot better, much more fundamentally sound. He was more willing to throw the straight left. His kick selection was as good as ever. He was a monster in the clinch. I think what we're going to see in this fight in terms of level of skill is about as high as we will get.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that. Yeah, the top of the crop at middleweight is essentially, I mean, it's so good compared to the rest of the division because it's really just the rest of the light heavyweight top 10 plus Robert Whittaker. That's essentially, it's these gigantic athletic freaks who are all just amazingly good, huge fighters, and then a former welterweight who happens to be the champion. Maybe that was the problem that Romero had with Whittaker more than anything else, is that Romero rarely faces a middleweight who is anything like as fast as him, and Whittaker was faster. So I think that was really what gave him problems. But basic dynamics of this matchup, that speed from Yoel Romero is a big one. One thing that did stand out to me just in contrast to Romero more than it ever has, was that Luke Rockhold is not a particularly fast fighter. He's just in comparison to Romero, of course, the crazy grace and agility of Romero. Rockhold does not have that kind of speed. And so we are going to have a contest at long range between Romero's speed, his rhythm changes, his trickiness with bursts of speed from outside, being a fighter who doesn't like to throw up much of a pace, versus the kicks of Luke Rockhold. And so I'm kind of wondering who is going to be the first one to change the dynamics of this fight. Is Rockhold going to be able to kick effectively enough from long range that he can force Romero to wrestle with him? Once Romero wrestles with him, we have an entirely different fight in our hands. Or is Romero going to be tricky enough that Rockhold feels like he needs to force some kind of clinch tie-up, needs to force a wrestling game because he's not comfortable at range, and as we know, has some problems, A, with durability, and B, with striking defense.
So I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. I think Rockhold is very fast.
Yeah.
But he is not as fast as Yoel Romero is. And the reason why Rockhold does not seem as fast as he actually is to the eye is because he never changes speeds. Everything he throws is super fucking fast, right? But what we see as a result of that is that guys can time him, and figure it out. Like, because Rockhold doesn't really play with rhythm, because he doesn't play with speed, everything he shows you is a fastball.
Absolutely.
And if you watch any baseball at all, you know that no matter how fast a fastball pitcher throws, if you can get the timing, you can hit the fastball.
Yeah, right? It's not so much that he looked slow in comparison to his opponents. Like I said, in comparison to Romero, he looked slow. But it did stand out that he seems to kind of put everything into every shot. That was the thing that really troubled him against Michael Bisping. And I remember just sort of wryly laughing to myself when he said, man, I shouldn't have committed to that jab. Because, like, for Luke Rockhold, a jab is something that might be too risky to throw because it requires you to cover distance and lead. When in reality, it should be one of your safest attacks possible. It should be the one that you cannot get caught out doing, but it's because he commits to everything. Whether it's a jab or a round kick, it's like same speed, full intensity, drive through it.
Yeah, he doesn't know how to pick and choose shots. Like, it was, I mean, and I think I recall in the corner of that fight with Dave Branch, Bob Cook was saying, you got to be faster. You got to be faster. And I think, like, that was the wrong message. I think he would have been better off. And you could see the look on Henry Hooft's face. Like, I think Hooft was kind of visibly frustrated with what Bob Cook was telling him, because Hooft was giving him pretty good technical advice, the kind of technical advice that Hooft usually gives him. And, like, when Cook said that, there was a look on Hooft's face, like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Bitch, what?
Because it wasn't that he wasn't fast enough when he was landing shots on Dave Branch in the first round of that fight. He needed to be a little more proactive. He needed to lead a little more and not just look for his counter right hook. But he didn't need to be faster. He could have stood to mix up his speeds more.
Yeah, I think that more than anything is why Rockhold is so reliant on those counters. At long range, he kicks because he doesn't feel like he can be countered at that range, and he's an incredibly dexterous kicker. You know, he places his legs so well, seems to get so much power, even just landing with the instep at the very end of the arc. He's got this whipping velocity to his kicks. So he's effective there and can't be countered. And then in the pocket or anything close to the pocket, it's like he only wants to counter. But I think it's because he doesn't know how to, I think you're right, he doesn't know how to vary the tempo on his attacks, which is a strong contrast to Yoel Romero, who is like a middleweight Kyoji Horiguchi in how he sets and breaks tempo that's his main mode of disguising his attacks, is to disguise it with his rhythm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really, really strong contrast. And it puts me of two minds with regard to this fight, because I actually think Romero is going to struggle a little bit with the distance, because Romero likes to kick. Romero fights long for a guy who is not especially tall. He's listed at 6 feet. I would guess Romero is probably more like 5'10".
Yeah.
I think 6 feet is an exceptionally generous height to give him. Whereas Rockhold, I've met Rockhold. Rockhold is every bit of 6'3". So
does he look strong? That's the real question.
He looks incredibly strong.
Okay, good.
He does not look frail.
Okay, good.
Like the dude is just fucking jacked, man. He's like, I don't know how he makes 185. It is wild to me.
No, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so I think Romero is really going to have trouble with the distance, which means that Rockhold is going to be able to kick him from long range. Probably he's going to land shots. Romero will kick him back, but not as much and not as effectively. So the question is, what is Romero's response going to be to those kicks?
Eat them?
Does he just stand there and take them? Maybe. I tend to think Romero is going to kind of sell out to catch kicks and try to turn them into takedowns.
Yeah.
I think Romero is too smart to just sit at long range and get kicked.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean he'll either, I mean the choices for Romero are either that he will then get on his bike and move a lot, which could work, right? If he gets Luke Rockhold to really chase him, Romero could just deck Rockhold on the way in. Yep. But you might be right. Like he's not, when somebody's really attacking him, he doesn't. Romero strikes me as a very, very tactical fighter. It's like he sees openings in the moment. I don't think he's particularly good at judging the fight as a whole. I think it's one of his real shortcomings. Like when he fought Jacare Souza, and having just rewatched it, still not 100% sure who won that fight. The last two rounds were not what Yoel Romero needed after the first round, but it was probably because in the first round he sold out going for a finish that on rewatch didn't necessarily look like it was really there. He had Jacare hurt, but then jumped into his guard and tried to kind of pot shot him to death, and it just wasn't working. And he kept trying it for like the last 45 seconds of the round. And so, yeah, I think you might be right. Like the way Romero tends to make decisions, Rockhold putting pressure on him with kicks probably prompts him to attack Rockhold. Rockhold's defensive wrestling is phenomenally good. I think we should underscore that. That is one of the things that I still remember so clearly about the fight with Jacare, is how nightmarish a time Jacare had trying to get Rockhold down. And then you add to that the layer of counter wrestling jiu-jitsu that Rockhold has to back that up. How good his go-behinds are, how crushing he is from top control. Now, it's difficult to imagine anybody securing top control on Yoel Romero at this point, but if anyone can do it, it's sure as hell Luke Rockhold, right?
Yeah. So I'm of a couple of minds about this. I think you're right that Romero is exceptionally tactical, but there's a strategic edge to his tactics. I think especially what we saw against Chris Weidman and against Robert Whittaker. What we saw there was a strategic reason for the tactical responses that he had. Because he correctly identified Whittaker's game involves covering a lot of distance, right? It involves it involves leaping in and out. It involves cutting angles. It involves a lot of movement in space. So what did Romero do? So first of all, he attacked Whittaker's legs. We saw him do that really effectively. He busted up Whittaker's knee on one of the first kind of stomp kicks that he threw in that fight, right? So he tries to take away Whittaker's movement. That's step number one. As it turned out, it didn't work, but you couldn't count on just ungodly toughness.
Yeah, it turns out Robert Whittaker only needs one knee to win a fight, so.
Which is just fucking insane. Yet another layer of insanity to how good Whittaker's performance was there. So that's point number one. Point number two, what did he do when Whittaker tried to leap in?
He tried to tie him up when Whittaker leaped in.
That's one thing he tried. Thing number two that he tried, he countered him. He looked real clean as a counterpuncher. He didn't throw them enough, but when he did, my God, they were some beautiful shots, beautifully timed.
How did he counter him early? Was he picking a left hand as he countered him early?
He threw a lot of counter right hooks. He threw a beautiful check hook. He threw a counter left hand. He tried to counter Whittaker's counters too. He would lead with something, draw out the counter, and then counter that as Whittaker tried to keep his feet under him and move forward with it. And then he tried to hit reactive takedowns, and he hit some beautiful ones. Or he would go counter as Whittaker leaps in, counter punch, then immediate level change and takedown. Yeah. So he had a variety of tactical responses to the strategic problem of Whittaker leaping in and covering distance. Right. So I think he deserves some credit for that. He also figured out against Chris Weidman that what he needed to do was slow the pace down. and not let Weidman try to grind him out, that there was a finite number of things that the Weidman was going to show him, and eventually he was going to catch him with a big thing. I actually thought that was more strategic than tactical. Like, I thought he had a much better sense for what the rhythm of that fight was going to look like than Weidman did. So I agree that he makes some puzzling ass decisions, but there's also some brilliance to it. And I think that's kind of what makes it hard, is where between the occasional bit of just sheer dumbassery and the occasional flashes of brilliance, what are we going to see here against Rockhold?
Yeah. And does Rockhold have a stamina advantage? I imagine he does, but at times it looks a little shaky. I mean, of course, there was the Chris Weidman fight when he had the staph infection, so that probably had something to do with it, just like it did for Kevin Lee against Tony Ferguson. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, I think Rockhold can outlast Romero.
Should be able to, yeah.
It's a very tough fight to call, man. The dynamics of it are very strange. Like the way that Romero sort of sets his traps, there's so much flexibility to what Yoel Romero can do. You know, like I think he kind of has modes where it's like he's in moving mode. There's not going to be a ton of head movement. There's not going to be a ton of, but he's going to make you chase him. He's going to draw you in. He's going to feed you his tempo until you get used to it, and then he can trick you. And then there's like pocket boxing mode where he's like rolling under shots and coming back with counters. And then there is just pure wrestling mode Romero, where he is one of the most fearsome scramblers I've ever seen. As for the wrestling matchup, what do you make of the different ways that these guys approach their takedowns? I think both of them, Romero feels like he has a ton of flexibility to his wrestling game, but he does often, I think, resort to, well, that's tough to say. Like Romero, it kind of feels like he can do everything as a wrestler. Rockhold's really effective from the clinch. He's very good with his body lock, and I'm not so sure about, how is Romero going to meet him in the tie-ups?
I'm fascinated by the wrestling and transitional matchup in this fight, because both guys, Rockhold has incredible takedown defense in open space. Romero is an incredible open space wrestler because he has so much drive. Like when he gets in on your hips, Romero's drive and ability to finish is insane, because it's like he's on a wrestling mat, right? And he can just drive and lift and finish. Rockhold is incredibly good at getting his hips out of the way and turning your shot into a front headlock. Where Rockhold kind of struggles a little bit more is with his back to the fence. I don't think he's a great cage wrestler. I think he's much more dangerous in open space. And if you're worried about his guillotine and his front headlock and his moves to the back, those are open space problems to worry about. Mm-hmm. But conversely, Romero does not have the gas tank to get into grinding fence wars with Rockhold. I think that's the quickest way for him to burn out his gas tank and lose this fight.
And I don't think Rockhold's a bad cage wrestler per se. And you didn't say bad. He doesn't have
less dangerous there.
Right. He doesn't have as many options from there because the grappling game that flows out of his wrestling works in open space. He needs like room to scramble and move around on top of his opponent. I think it's that he doesn't have as many bridges to his preferred style from the fence.
You saw that against Branch, right? Because Branch secured a takedown. It was against the fence, and Rockhold immediately tries to work for a front headlock because that's his, or a guillotine because that's his go-to thing there. Mm-hmm. Not in the way that, a novice will like just hold on to a guillotine or a front headlock for dear life because he doesn't know how to do anything else, but because for Rockhold, it's instinct to go for the thing that he knows leads to everything else that he does well. But there was nowhere for his hips to go, and Branch kind of controlled the last 25 or 30 seconds of that round and landed some decent shots from top position just because there was nowhere for his hips to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it does kind of feel like the decision to wrestle is more Romero's than Rockhold's. I think Rockhold can force Romero to try to wrestle him if he can really work that kicking game from long range, if he gets the range he wants. But it does feel a lot more likely that if it goes to the ground, it's going to be because Yoel Romero initiated a shot or Yoel Romero tied up, and not because Luke Rockhold forced him into a clinch. It almost never happens where Rockhold forces the clinch on his opponent.
Yeah. So see, I can see the outlines of a game plan that I think would work really well for Romero here, where he focuses on catching kicks at range when Rockhold tries to kick him, turn those into takedowns. You don't want to try to hold Rockhold down, I don't think. I think that's kind of a waste of your time and energy.
Yeah.
What you want to do is use his tendency to scramble against him, let him try to work for a front headlock of your own. Just try to kind of scramble and move on top of him, be smooth with it, and just land damaging shots in transition. That I think that's where that's something Yoel Romero is really good at, is hit the quick takedown, land a couple of shots, let him back up, let him know that you can do that, and then use that to the benefit of the rest of your game. Open up a flow chart of possibilities based on your opponent's realization of how you can counter their kicking game or how you can counter their forward rushes. The problem is those are tremendous investments of energy to do that, right? Like if you're going to let Luke Rockhold kick you, grab the body kick, then run that into a double leg and know that you're only going to have him down for maybe 10 or 15 seconds and that you've got to kind of make hay in that 10 or 15 seconds. That is a huge, huge, huge investment of time and energy. And if it doesn't work, if you don't get the takedown, if you can't land some shots in transition, you have spent maybe a quarter of all the energy you're going to burn in an entire round on one 10 or 15 second sequence that doesn't go anywhere. So if he had like Alex Volkanovski's gas tank,
well,
then
don't be so unfair. Nobody has Alex Volkanovski's gas tank for pushing that kind of wrestling pace. Few people do anyway.
I mean, if Romero had, I'm trying to think who's another big explosive guy who has like a really deep gas tank. Dennis Bermudez. Dennis Bermudez has a great gas tank.
There you go.
Right? If he had a Dennis Bermudez type gas tank, then he could do that, and that would be his game plan. And I would pick him to win that fight handily, because eventually you could make Rockhold scared to kick you, and then Rockhold becomes kind of a middling to good pocket boxer and counter puncher, and dangerous clinch fighter, and that's all stuff that you can deal with if you're Yoel Romero.
Yeah, but unfortunately, Romero is he's right in the midst of the Francis Ngannou to Dennis Bermudez scale of super jacked stamina. He's right in the middle there. At times though, Romero's been so good at managing that energy that he really does slow down the pace, and he might be able to get that out of Rockhold. Rockhold does tend to fall back on that counter punching, and God, I don't know.
Well, so if Rockhold,
I hate this.
I mean, this is what makes this really interesting.
Yeah, I love it.
You can see the outlines of game plans for both guys, right? You can see, okay, here's how Romero beats him. Romero exploits his edge in understanding of rhythm, his ability to change speeds, his raw speed advantage, his takedowns. He slows the fight to a pace where he's throwing maybe 6 or 8 strikes a minute, and he shoots a takedown like twice a round. I think that's maybe 1.5 times a round. 3 takedowns every 2 rounds.
Sure.
That's a sustainable pace for him. He has a good chance, especially if he waits on a counter, of landing something huge on Rockhold, because Rockhold is so predictable with his head movement. He leans so much. There's a real chance for Romero to catch him clean with a big shot, either win a round or in the fight. So there's that. But then there's also the possibility that you can see Rockhold's game plan too. Rockhold, I think he wants to be in the clinch with Romero. I think he's bigger. He's got more leverage. I think he could control him there for extended periods of time.
He's not really in danger there. I think he can wrestle with Romero mostly. So it's more like strategically the clinch favors him, because Romero is expending energy that he can't afford. Whereas Rockhold can clinch for 5 rounds, as he did against Jacare.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that works for Rockhold. He could kick him at long distance. He's got a stamina advantage. In the pocket, Rockhold is no slouch either. Like, Rockhold can throw and land on Romero. He's vulnerable to the counters there.
Yeah.
But he can deal with that. I don't think his chin is so bad that he needs to be worried about the first shot he gets hit with. Like, that's, I guess I lean very slightly toward Rockhold. It just feels like he has a few more areas where he's capable, but it's a coin flip, man.
Yeah, and I think I have to go with Romero, because I can't, for the life of me, I cannot get the image of Lyoto Machida lacing at Luke Rockhold with an easy left hand seconds into their fight, and imagine, like, boy, what if that was Yoel Romero? What if that had twice as much speed, 3 times as much power? I don't know. Like, Rockhold is so easy to time, I think, for a fighter like Romero, that as long as he doesn't just sit on the edge of kicking range, I think I'm going to bank on the fact that when he gets kicked, knowing it's a 5-round fight, because he was very smart in how he approached the 5 rounds against Whitaker, I'm going to bank on the fact that bank on the notion, rather, that he creates distance and gets Rockhold to chase him if Rockhold wants to kick, and sort of just denies exchanges and hopes to gamble on openings when they appear to him, rather than trying to force anything. And I think he can win that kind of fight. I think he can just pick his shots and hurt Rockhold at some point.
You know what? I think you're exactly right, because Rockhold, we classify Rockhold as kind of a boxer puncher because he can do lots of different things. He has some flexibility with his approach. He can kind of stick and move sometimes. He can sit back and counter. But I really think he's at his most comfortable when he's going after you, when he's pressuring.
For sure.
When you stand in front of him and let him kick, and he can push you back, and then he forces you to come in on him so he can land that counter right, which is what he did to Bisping the first time they fought.
And he's got that variety to his kick, so it's like the Jackson Wink switch up style that I talk about frequently, where once Rockhold has the initiative, just having the diverse array of attacks from that range with his frame makes him super effective. Is it a front kick? Is it a high kick? Well, you're waiting on me, so you have to guess.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think that works that well against Romero. I think it's really hard. I think you're right. Like, Romero I would expect to see Romero going forward early and just kind of testing things. Then Rockhold getting mad at some point, deciding that he's going to take the initiative, and then going after Romero. And I can see that going. I can kind of see how that could work real well for Rockhold.
Yeah.
He just sticks him on the end of range and barrages him with kicks. I think Romero's going to be real vulnerable to a head kick in this fight. I think just because of the way he holds his hands, he's gotten clipped with them before.
Man's been kicked in the head a fair few times. Yeah, notably.
I think you've kind of talked me into Romero. I think the speed and switch up and rhythm thing is going to be the key here. Like, Rockhold will show Romero's speeds, and I think eventually Romero is going to see those and figure them out.
I hope I'm right. Anytime I talk anyone into a pick, I'm almost always wrong. But it's such a difficult fight to parse for me, because, I mean, I think a big part of it is because Yoel Romero's in it. Honestly, like, that's what makes it difficult to analyze, because I still don't really understand how all of Yoel Romero's game works. I can identify things he does well, but how is he going to approach this opponent? What triggers is he going to have prepared for? I don't know.
I mean, we have been talking about. Let me look this up. I'm going to figure out exactly how many times we have discussed Yoel Romero on this show. We talked about him before he fought Machida, before he fought Jacare, before he fought Chris Weidman, before he fought Whitaker. So we've talked about him. This is the 5th time. It took us, I think, until after the 3rd fight of his that we broke down that we really started to understand exactly why he's good, exactly how and why his game works the way it does.
Yeah.
He's a puzzling fighter. He's hard to figure out.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it does. I think we need to understand and acknowledge the fact that he does things that are hard to analyze in any sort of systematic way.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, he reminds me of a middleweight Kyoji Horiguchi, where it's like he can. I always talked about how Kyoji Horiguchi could get away with just leading with a body kick from 6 feet away at flyweight, with opponents as quick as they are, because he's so tricky with his rhythm. He just has a way of disguising his attacks. You don't know when it's coming, and you see so much movement from him. It's really difficult to judge when it's the movement that presages an attack. And Romero has that with everything. It's like, it's difficult at any moment to tell what he's intending. I just feel like, the counterpunching, the deliberately limiting exchanges might frustrate Luke Rockhold. And I'm not sure that Rockhold can actually. I don't know. That this is a question to finish us off, because we've already gone half an hour. Probably have to cut this down. But has Luke Rockhold ever faced an opponent who limits the pace? Like, how many opponents has Luke Rockhold faced who don't come after him at all? Who force him on the offensive and try to negate what he's doing? Like Lyoto Machida. But an old Lyoto Machida.
And a kind of a washed Machida was still able to land some really good shots on Rockhold in that fight.
Yeah. That's why I think that Romero might just be he can be a difficult style matchup for Luke Rockhold, but that still is putting a lot of pressure on Yoel Romero to approach this fight correctly, which I think he's shown evidence he can do that. He does think about his fight strategically. He game plans, or at least his team does. That's based on how he's approached his last two fights at least. But I don't know. Yeah, just banking on Romero. When in doubt, bet Romero. That's my theory.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued to watch this. This card as a whole, not going to have a lot of viewers.
Nope.
But this fight is really good. I'm very excited for it. It may not be super exciting for long stretches, which is also true of a lot of Yoel Romero fights.
Yeah.
But I'm very interested in it.
Well, that's a lesson in narrative, Pat. That the fight means something, and so I will happily sit through 5 minutes of nothing happening when I know that something that means a lot could happen at any moment, as compared to a fight where lots is happening but none of it means anything. You know what I mean? That's
an excellent point.
It is like the difference between I don't know, I'm looking for a movie parallel. It's like the difference between watching like The Black Coat's Daughter, very slow moving atmospheric horror, hardly anything happens, but I'm just riveted to the screen, versus like Pirates of the Caribbean 5, where things won't stop happening and I just want them to stop because I don't care about any of it. This is The Black Coat's Daughter, and I enjoyed that movie. I hope I will enjoy the fight as well. Let's wrap up this very extended segment on that note. When we come back, we're going to get into the co-main event of Hunt versus Blades, as well as some of the other fights that mean anything peppered throughout this card. And then finally, we are going to wrap things up at the end of today's show with a brief discussion of the results of Machida versus Anders and the rest of UFC Belang after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. All right, and welcome back to Heavy Hands. It's been, no lies, Pat, it's been a day since we recorded our first segment, and to be honest, I'm having regrets about pivoting to full-time Super Bowl and football coverage. We just thought we would do Romero versus Rockhold for old time's sake before moving on to the full-time football coverage in segment 2. I don't really want to do that anymore, Pat.
No, I think we should go back to MMA because there's a pretty good heavyweight fight here between Mark Hunt and Curtis Blades that I would like to talk about a little bit. I don't know, Connor, what do you think?
There certainly is. I really like your very casual-seeming patter, Pat. It's very natural. Doesn't sound at all like you're recording a local access TV commercial.
That's what I'm here for.
So, Mark Hunt, Curtis Blades. That is the co-main event for UFC 221. I think it's a pretty compelling fight. Mark Hunt surely cannot be long for his time at the top of the sport, although God knows what the rules actually are in the UFC's heavyweight division. Curtis Blades, very promising up-and-comer. Let's talk about Blades' development a little bit, because obviously this is a fight designed to test him as a prospect. Me, personally, I thought that Curtis Blades looked really good in the Daniel Omielanchuk fight, if you took that fight in the context of how he had looked before then. I know it was a boring, slow fight. I know that he didn't get any wrestling, but I think that the fact that he failed on every single takedown and still managed to outstrike Daniel Omielanchuk, a very experienced, if not amazingly impressive kickboxer, says a lot about Curtis Blades' potential and how quickly he is capable of improving.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, I think Mark Hunt is not Daniel Omielanchuk.
No.
But the whole point with the prospect is that you're progressing. The fighter who shows up against Mark Hunt should be the version of Curtis Blades who shows up against Mark Hunt. We have every reason to believe that he will be better than the guy who showed up against Daniel Omielanchuk. I think Blades at this point is a strong example of what I call the Corey Anderson type of striker, where he's a guy who has been taught fundamentals, right? Like, he knows how to throw punches. He knows how to bring his feet with him. He knows what is supposed to follow what in kind of a rote sense.
Right.
He has been well trained, it seems to me, from the very beginning of his career. I think he's had pretty good instincts. I think he's been pretty well coached. He seems like a dedicated, hardworking dude who puts in his reps in the gym, and that reflects itself in the way that he works on the feet. The problem is he's fighting a dude who has an insane depth of skill and who is going to be able to figure out kind of rote patterns without too much trouble at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Daniel Omielanchuk made it relatively easy on him. Likewise with Alexei Olenek, by throwing a lot of like single strikes, letting Curtis kind of work from the longer range he was able to enforce against both of those guys. I don't know if Curtis Blades is a Dwayne Ludwig fighter, but I know he's at Team Elevation.
He has worked with Ludwig a little bit in the past, but I went back and I looked through Ludwig's Instagram and I looked through Curtis Blades' Instagram, and I could not find any pictures of them together in the last 8 or 9 months.
I swear there was some comment in like the Omielanchuk fight or around there where they said he had worked with Dwayne Ludwig, but his style doesn't look exactly like every Ludwig fighter, but the comfort, the quickness with which he has developed comfort with his game does remind me of what I've always noted with Ludwig fighters, or with like Mark Henry's fighters in some cases, where they are, as you said, the moves are kind of rote, but few coaches in MMA have such a drastic impact on fighters who come to them learning to strike in such a short amount of time as a guy like Dwayne Ludwig, because he seems to have like this nice set of moves that you learn. And Curtis Blades has those moves. He knows that when you jab, something's probably coming afterwards, so you pull your head back. He knows that when you slip inside a jab, there might be a hook, and so you roll under. Doesn't matter for the time being if he puts his eyes on the ground when he does it, or if his posture is not great, or when he does throw the jab, his hand drops. He understands that things go in a sequence. He is learning a system, and he has a few pieces of that system that work quite well. The question is the system nearly complete enough? To rephrase your point, is that system even close to complete enough to deal with Mark Hunt? And if not, is Curtis Blades capable of hitting takedowns on Mark Hunt instead?
It's kind of hard to tell what we're going to see from Hunt, because he looked extraordinary against Derek Lewis.
Yeah.
Like, he looked really good. Again, who's a big, tall, thick heavyweight. I mean, like, Lewis is a huge dude, and Hunt did not really have any problems with the range against him. But Hunt struggled with the range against the prior two big, tall heavyweights that he faced in Alistair Overeem and Brock Lesnar. Like, he absolutely could not get inside against Lesnar. Struggled to do it. Like, Lesnar, who has never been a great striker, just kind of jabbed him and then hit takedowns. Like, and Alistair Overeem, through kind of side kicks and jabs and straight punches, was able to almost entirely avoid any danger from Hunt in that fight. That was sad to watch.
Is Curtis Blades' jab worse than Brock Lesnar's? I don't think so.
I don't think it is. He's not as experienced or risk averse as Lesnar, which I think was a huge part of that. Like, Lesnar was determined to play the safest possible game in that fight, and as it turned out, had the tool and the length to do that.
Yeah,
so
he had the tool to do that. Hey, he's just
I heard it after I said it.
He's just a jacked white boy. Don't worry about it.
He also had the chemical help to do it too.
Yeah, that can't go without being said. It is one of the frustrating things about the heavyweight division, Pat, that I'm often tempted to say, like, well, at heavyweight, consequences are just more dire, but in another sense, they're not. Like, I can't ever tell when a guy is declining or when when one of these old dinosaurs has finally hit the end of the road, because the consequences in their fights are so dire. I don't know. I mean, what explains how poor Mark Hunt looked against Brock Lesnar compared to how good he looked against Derek Lewis? Obviously those are very different opponents, but maybe it was just the threat of the takedown. It just shut Hunt down. Could that be it?
Yeah, I mean, it could be, but Hunt seems to go through these phases where he looks done and then he has kind of a resurgent performance.
Yeah.
He looks done and he has a resurgent performance. And I mean, at some point he's just going to be done, right?
I mean, I guess he has to be, I would assume. Maybe not. Maybe 98-year-old Mark Hunt will be knocking out like the number 5 contender in 50 years.
I mean, it's hard to say because like for so long in his resurgent UFC career, what Hunt did better than anybody was change speeds. Like he would show you one speed, he would show you a range, and then he would change speeds very quickly, especially like the counter left hook that he hit to knock down Czech Congo shortly into their fight.
Yeah.
When Hunt was a big underdog, mind you. Hunt was a huge underdog in that fight against Czech Congo, which seems insane now. Mm-hmm. But like he hits this Czech left hook on a on-rushing Congo, and like the whole tenor of the fight changed, and then Hunt finished him shortly thereafter.
Yeah.
Like that change-up speed, Hunt still shows it off in bursts. And I think the question is, from fight to fight, does Hunt have the change-up speed? He had it against Derek Lewis. He did not have it against Lesnar or Overing.
Yeah.
So I don't know what accounts for its appearance and disappearance.
Yeah, and I think part of what sets him apart from a guy like Derek Lewis is, I mean, really, it really is a gulf of skill there. In terms of the depth of striking skill. Like Mark Hunt has defense. He has I don't know if it's necessarily systematic, but he goes into a shell after he throws his shots. He rolls with punches to take the sting off of them. He comes back with counters. Like Derek Lewis doesn't really do any of those things. He's kind of like a gigantic pot shotter who doesn't like to do much else. So maybe that explains it. I don't know. As for Curtis Blades, weighing the threat of that takedown, I'm not 100% sure that Curtis Blades has got himself comfortable enough with setting up his takedowns to have an effect on Mark Hunt. I mean, what he really needed to do against Daniel Omielanchuk, and as he himself noted, that was a fight against a southpaw, his first fight against a southpaw, I think, so I had a little bit of a harder time figuring out the stance. That's fair, but he really needed to hit a takedown when Omielanchuk was throwing at him, and he was not comfortable enough, I think, with his striking to just let Omielanchuk throw and miss. To just stand there and duck under a shot and go in for a takedown. And I think that's the only way he's getting Mark Hunt down. If he rushes him with these unset up, bending over shots from 10 feet away, the way he was against Omielanchuk and Olenek, then Hunt can stop that kind of stuff. He's actually quite a good takedown defender if he sees the takedown coming. It's hitting that snatch single or a blast double as he's throwing the way Stipe Miocic did that really seems to work if you want to get him to the ground. I'm not sure that Curtis Blades can do that, and if he can't, I think that Hunt just has too much feel for the striking game. I think Hunt is certainly experienced enough as a kickboxer to pick up on some of those rote patterns in what Curtis Blades does. And again, this is not me saying that Curtis Blades is not worth anything or that he's not going somewhere. I just don't think he's there yet. He's still developing. I think Hunt might be, if he shows up in form like he did against Derek Lewis at least, Hunt I think is a step too far for Curtis Blades at this point.
I think I'm going to go with Blades here.
Yeah.
Because I think he's learning. I do think the Hunt who showed up against Derek Lewis and the Blades who showed up against, say, Daniel Omielanchuk, I think if that's the fight, then Blades is in real serious trouble. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that's going to be the case. Oh. I think that we're going to see an improved Blades and a Hunt who managed to put it together against Lewis and against a guy who had no real idea of how to set the distance, who did not have a diverse takedown game, who is really, really, really dang limited and relies on his physicality. Blades is maybe not quite that physical, though he is very quick, very athletic, very big.
Yeah, I think he's quite an athlete.
Yeah. So he's got that, but I also think he has a more fundamentally sound striking game. And while Hunt will be able to key on that in particular ways, I also don't think Blades is going to panic in the same way that Lewis kind of did, or run out of options in the same way that Lewis did. Mm-hmm. I think even just having the takedown, like a wide array of takedowns to fall back on, is going to give Blades enough to work with here. And I think there are going to be some scary moments. I think he's going to eat some shots, but I like Blades to work through to a 29-28 decision.
Well, I was going to say I hope you're right, because I do want to see Blades develop. But then I realized that saying that would mean I hope Mark Hunt loses, and I never hope that. But I would like to see Curtis Blades turn that corner. So I like the pick. Let's move on then. We're skipping most of the main card here. And what a main card it is, Pat. I don't actually hate this pay-per-view, and probably because it has a lot of my personal favorites on it. Like, it has Li Jingliang. I like Ross Pearson versus Mizuto Hirota because I like Mizuto Hirota. But it's not a great card. So we're going to be jumping around here to go to the fights that really interest us. And with that on that note, we are going to move down to the Fox Sports 1 prelims to talk very briefly about Israel Adesanya, a kickboxer who is making his UFC debut in the middleweight division against Rob Wilkinson. Your take on Is Adesanya, Pat?
He is hella fun.
Yeah, hard to disagree.
Really, really, really fun. I'm not sure that he's like going to be the future champion in this division, but he is an incredible kickboxer. He has a ton of very high level experience against very good kickboxers. He fought Alex Pereira, who was a glory contender. He got knocked out by Alex Pereira in his last fight, but he has wins over guys like Jason Wilness, like really, really good kickboxers. I think the interesting thing is that his striking game in particular translates much better to MMA than it does to elite level kickboxing, because Adesanya is a sniper of a striker. If he's like Michael Page is like a homeless man's version of Adesanya in terms of what Adesanya is capable of doing, the depth and array of different things he can do.
I would say he fights more like a boxer who kicks than your typical idea of like a Dutch school kickboxer. He is like he picks his shots, he maintains his distance. He's got nice movement. He doesn't have the typical Dutch style of just kind of go in, exchange back and forth with combinations, all of which end in a kick. You know, he's a lot more flexible than that.
Yes. I don't know. I think that Adesanya can do a lot of different things. I think he can throw crisp boxing combinations. I think he likes to kick. I think he's an incredibly dangerous kicker. He's kind of got a little bit of the traditional martial arts footwork type stuff going on, but underlaid by a really strong technical kickboxing foundation. But what he really likes to do is pick you off a shot or two at a time, which works much better in MMA than it does at the elite level of kickboxing, where with big gloves and sound technical defense, it's really hard to make a single shot count the way it does in MMA. It's much hard. Even if you're an extremely accurate puncher, it's hard to make those single punches count and tell in the same way in a kickboxing match. Like Adesanya is a guy who in a kickboxing match would like to throw 15 to 18 strikes in a minute against opponents, guys like Pereira or Wilness, who want to throw 25, 30, 40 strikes a minute. Like, it's hard to make that pace work at an elite level. In an MMA fight, if you can throw 12 extremely high quality strikes mixed in with feints, then that's more than enough, not just to knock your opponent out, but to win rounds too.
Yeah, especially in MMA where there's even more of like a my turn, your turn sort of mentality with most people striking. I'm always excited to see somebody with a high-level striking background come in and just play with the MMA dynamic that for most fighters seems so set in stone. So I'm looking forward to it. I don't know really what to expect. I know Adesanya has an MMA career. I can't say much about the quality of opposition he's faced.
He's faced pretty solid regional competition in Australia. He beat Melvin Gillard in a fight where Gillard was horrifically overmatched, which was not surprising. But what's surprising about Adesanya, the MMA fighter, is that he has a really nice kind of array of trips and throws in the clinch. Like, he looks like a guy who spent a lot of time doing Thai-style clinch work.
Okay.
And so he really likes to hit kind of counter throws, counter throws and trips and dumps and things like that. He's extremely quick to get to dominant positions. He likes to scramble, which is fitting because he's a really good athlete. You see that a lot from like young athletic fighters, is that they love to get in those scrambles. That could get him into trouble. I don't think it will here. Wilkinson, the guy he's fighting, is a pretty straightforward kickboxer. Not like a terrible wrestler, but not a good enough wrestler to really impose this game on Adesanya. I would expect this to either be a dominant decision or like a kind of a highlight reel KO for Adesanya once he gets Wilkinson's kind of rote timing and figures out what to throw around it.
All right. Last words for this segment then. why don't we move on to Jeremy Kennedy versus Alexander Volkanovski? And unfortunately, we're gonna focus on that one instead of another fight that I actually do quite like. I just want to give my brief recommendation, since we're not going to discuss it much. Jussier Formiga versus Ben Nguyen is like a legitimately meaningful fight between top 10 flyweights, and Jussier Formiga in particular is like that guy who, with a slightly different flip of the coin in a few of his fights, would have very likely been fighting for the title. He's probably the best guy in the division to not have fought for the title. So that's an important one. But Jeremy Kennedy versus Alexander Volkanovski is interesting, and obviously enough, for any listeners who have listened to the show before, you guys know we like Alexander Volkanovski. We're very high on his potential, on his style, his athletic ability, all of it. We really like the look of him as a prospect. Jeremy Kennedy makes for an interesting opponent because he likes to fight the same kind of fight as Volkanovski. This is like the featherweight B-grade version of finally seeing that Kevin Lee versus Khabib Nurmagomedov fight I was interested in seeing. Like, what happens if the super dominant wrestle boxer takes on a powerful wrestler who loves to grind? And how does he deal with that change in matchup when he's usually the only one who wants to press that kind of fight in his opponent? What do you think, man?
That's really going to be the question here, because really what you see is, what we're going to find out is, has Volkanovski just managed to grind this out against people who aren't equipped to deal with him? Is he the best version of that kind of grinder, or is it that he's actually exceptional at that, or is it that he has just been better at it than the guys he's been fighting? Because Kennedy is a guy who's going to be down to grind with you. He's going to be down to get into those messed up, grimy exchanges against the fence.
Mm-hmm.
So can Volkanovski deal with that? Can he work at the pace that Kennedy is going to want to push in those kinds of grimy clinch exchanges? I think the Volkanovski can. I'm a believer in him in this kind of fight. But I think it'll be interesting to find out. We've seen Volkanovski run a grinding game against guys who did not want to play a grinding game. Now we're going to see either A, can Volkanovski switch it up and do something other than that kind of grinding game, or is he just so good at it that he can overpower even other grinders?
Yeah. There's a thing with Kennedy is more of a grinder, I think, than Volkanovski. Like he's more comfortable to just spend a round latched onto a body lock, just dragging you to the ground or pressing you against the fence, putting your legs on a shelf and making it so that you can't get up. Volkanovski has a different approach to to more or less the same style, where, you know, he savages people while they're fighting to free themselves. And so I really wondered in this matchup what will happen if Volkanovski, the never stops moving, always progressing, always applying forward pressure, whether he's already engaged in the wrestling, whether he's on the ground, whatever, he's always progressing and making it more uncomfortable for the guy he's fighting. If he will become frustrated, or just, I wonder how he'll look if Kennedy is actually able to lock him down in a position and make him fight for a positional battle on the ground or against the cage. We have never seen Volkanovski have to do that. So I'm really curious about that. My gut feeling is, like you, Pat, Volkanovski's probably got the aggressive nature to handle Jeremy Kennedy. I think Kennedy's a little too hittable, and really, really needs to win in his one phase to beat most opponents. And that is not the case for Volkanovski. I think Volkanovski is much more capable of outstriking, just piecing somebody up with kickboxing if he cannot get them to the ground. When we saw a good bit of that in his last fight. Who was that against again? Shane Young. Well, poor Shane Young was just not ready, but we saw a good bit. And likewise against Mizuto Hirota, a much more experienced opponent that Volkanovski can handle himself in the kickboxing. He's actually pretty capable. So I like Volkanovski as well, but I am curious to see how that style matchup plays out. And that'll do it for our UFC 221 discussion. When we come back, we are going to revisit UFC Belém, a.k.a. UFC Machida versus Anders, and get into our favorite fights from that card, especially the main event after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let's get into it, Pat. Lyoto Machida versus Eric Anders. I know already from following you on Twitter, you felt that Eric Anders won this fight.
I did. I don't feel super strongly about it. I thought that Anders had done enough. In looking at the fight metric statistics afterwards, I realized that Anders really did not land that many strikes.
Yeah.
I didn't think Machida landed much in the way of high quality strikes over the course of the fight. It was mostly kind of piddling leg kicks, a little bit of work to the body. So, I don't think that the raw strike numbers tell the whole story of what happened here. But, I just really thought Machida didn't do much. Anders also didn't do much, but I thought Anders controlled the fight. I thought he landed by far the better strikes over the course of it, and I thought that should have been enough. I'm not surprised that Machida won. It was a hometown decision. That's always it's a hometown fight for him. That's always going to matter. It struck me as like a homeless man's version of what Yoel Romero tried to do to Machida.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And by the way, I should note, I thought Machida won, and this is going to be one of our most boring and uninteresting disagreements ever because, like you, I'm like, yeah, I can see it the other way. It's fine, because neither guy did much. It wasn't even a fight where it was close like Cruz Dillashaw, where I think there's like key differences in how you viewed the fight. It was really like not a lot happened. So I can't really complain about differences in scoring at all. Honestly, like Machida landed twice as many shots total as Eric Anders, but not many of them were great. And certainly the punches upstairs that Eric Anders landed were the most damaging. I liked a lot of what I saw from Eric Anders. I really did. I really liked, again, I noted this last week, but his footwork stood out to me again. He takes nice small steps. He doesn't rush. It's definitely, I think, what allowed him to spend so much time moving against such an experienced mover without slowing down, without seeming to suffer any attrition from the pace at all. There wasn't much of a pace, but he did a lot of chasing and a lot of cutting off, and it wasn't difficult because he was very efficient. Small side steps, small steps forward, little hop steps. He didn't even leave his stance and walk towards Machida because it would have made him vulnerable, even though it would have taken less energy. He just stayed nice and tight and subtle with his footwork, and the efficiency stood out to me. And then he was kind of too efficient down the stretch. It did feel like Eric Anders could have done more to put a stamp on this, which is why at the end, even though I wasn't sure Machida had won, I think Anders gave that last round away, that he could have done more in it and secured it without too much trouble, because it was very clear to me that Lyoto Machida could not absorb Eric Anders' strikes comfortably, that he didn't want to, and that he knew, a sharp contrast to the Machida of younger years, he knew he could not afford to step in and counter certain strikes. And that's not a fear that Machida ever used to have. Yeah,
this worried me from the perspective of being a guy. Well, I wouldn't say that worried me, but it was just really obvious to me watching this fight that Machida is not who he used to be.
For sure.
And I felt more like that than I did watching him against Derek Brunson, even in a fight where he got knocked out, in large part because he was so aware of his limitations and he was just like, okay, well, this is what I can do. And he didn't really, I guess what's sad to me after watching this is that there's no snap left on anything that he throws, really. Not the snap on his punches has been gone for quite some time. Honestly, it's been gone since probably 2015. Like the last time he really threw snappy punches was, I would say, against Luke Rockhold. I think that was really the last time he threw a punch where I thought, man, that had some zip on it.
Yeah. And even then, he landed.
And even then, it was not close to what he had, if you compare that to like the Ryan Bader fight.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that was gone. But then, for a while, he still had the zip on his kicks. there was not much zip on his kicks in this fight.
No.
It's so
no, some of it's the power going, some of it's the timing, right? A lot of the zip that Machida used to get out of his counter punches was helped by the collision he could create with his on-rushing opponent, and he doesn't really have the confidence to do that anymore. And credit to Eric Anders, he didn't give Machida enough on rushes to time him. He made it very difficult for somebody who wanted to counter by just sort of he just needed to do a little more, I think. But I actually found it to be a fairly promising performance from a very inexperienced fighter in Eric Anders.
Yeah, again, we cannot overstate how inexperienced Eric Anders is. And like the fact that he solved the Machida puzzle. He solved the Machida puzzle as an extremely inexperienced guy, even if he was not able to do enough to put a stamp on a win here, I think says a very great deal about the kind of potential that he has. Like I thought, again, something that stood out to me in his previous fights and in this one is that he makes really good decisions about when to shoot, when to do things. He didn't quite pull the trigger enough in this fight, but that's something that you'll kind of learn over time is he just was not quite aware of this is a time where I have to do a thing. Yeah. Right.
He definitely had the right idea, just small failures in execution.
Yeah. And that's stuff that I think is going to come. What we really saw here, it's a matter of knowing when you have that opportunity, when is the right time to do this, you know? And I thought Anders did the right thing in terms of not making the wrong decision. What we'll see a little more from him is picking the right time to make the right decision. That's I can be a little more concrete about this, right? So there were times when he would back Machida up, and it was very clear in Anders' head. He's like, okay, now I've got him here. What do I do now? Do I shoot a takedown? Do I dive into the clinch? Do I throw a punch? How many punches do I throw? Which punches do I throw? And he just couldn't quite pull the trigger fast enough on those decisions, which is very hard to do. It's hard to do that.
Yeah, and he had to think so much about it because he was trying to be unpredictable against a very good counterpuncher. He did not want to do the obvious thing every time he got a chance, you know?
Yeah, so... but I think if he can learn to do a few more things in the clinch, like I think if he were to go to Thailand for 8 weeks and just spend 8 weeks at like Tiger Muay Thai or something like that, and just work on how to be more damaging in the clinch, I think he would be a monstrous fighter because he's really big there. He's really strong. He's really nasty. He's got great instincts in transition. You can see that, like the spots where he does his damage is when he gets you down or halfway down and you're standing back up or you're trying to get away. You think you're grappling and he's hitting you.
Yeah.
Or you think you're wrestling and he's hitting you. That's what he's really good at. So I think if he can find a few more ways to sneak damage in there, he can work the pace that he wants to work at. He can do essentially the same stuff that he's doing right now, just a little bit more of it.
Yeah, I would have liked to see more feints. More of actively creating opportunities and you know, like measuring Machida's reactions, how he counters, and then maybe trying to counter those counters. I thought with the amount of just methodical, steady pressure Anders had on Machida through the last like 3 rounds of the fight, that those kinds of things would have worked. They would have helped him to slowly pick up the pace and wear the old Machida down. But you know, if you're going to come out in your first big test, one side of the coin is doing what Francis Ngannou did, and the other side of the coin is this. This is definitely a better look. It's definitely a more measured approach to an equally like experienced, a level of experience you have not faced before.
Yeah, as prospect losses go, we have the running out of ideas loss, which I think this was a category of the running out of ideas loss, where he just didn't quite have enough depth of skill to be able to make it count when he created the opportunities that he needed to. Like, he did a fantastic job. And I think what you and I both saw and why we're high on this is because what we saw was a logical process leading to him being in position to win the fight.
Yeah.
He was in position to win it. The fact that he didn't quite get there was more because he didn't know what to do once he got it there, or he didn't have enough depth to do what he needed to do when he got it there, rather than as a result of a flawed process to start with.
Yeah, and I don't even know if it's depth so much as just like comfort and creativity. It's like you don't have to do much. You don't have to have like a huge selection of strikes to know that there are endless permutations of those strikes. There's endless ways to order them, endless varieties of speeds, and that's I guess you could call that depth. It's more just
that seems very much like depth of skill to me. Where like, okay, now I've got him in this position. If I feint a jab, he'll probably run back into my left hand.
Okay, yeah.
That's the kind of depth of skill stuff. Or if I throw, okay, I've got him backed up, I can pivot and throw an inside and let him overcommit, and I can throw an inside angle counter right here. Stuff like that.
A better understanding of how the different skills inform one another.
Exactly. Yeah. That's all he needs. And the thing is, that's going to come with time. Like, there's no reason to think he's not going to learn those things over the course of the next couple of years.
Yeah, he's 30. He doesn't have a ton of time to keep going, but he has improved at a rapid rate already, and I don't think this was a step back. This was much like Blades versus Omielanchuk, in many ways better than I expected him to do at this level. So let's talk about the co-main event. This is probably the really big story from this card, as it was intended to be. Valentina Shevchenko murdered a woman in front of a cheering Brazilian crowd, and Mario Yamasaki watched and waited and collected the teeth as they fell to the canvas because he is making a necklace for himself, and you can't fault a man for having a hobby. What did you think of this performance, Pat? Obviously, the fight went on way too long. I mean, I assume you agree with that take without having asked you. Priscila Cachoeira was brought in to lose, as we all knew. We didn't spend a ton of time breaking down the dynamics of the matchup last week for that reason, because she was clearly being set up to make Shevchenko look good. I did, however, get a little bit of pleasure, sadistic pleasure, out of Dana White critiquing Mario Yamasaki as if the matchmakers had nothing to do with this severely lopsided matchup. As if the referee's responsible for doing all of the work that we couldn't bother to do by making sure that Shevchenko had an opponent who could actually stand up to her. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I thought this was not what this fight was for. The Shevchenko obviously could have done what she did and did it very effectively. The point of this, I thought, and maybe they can turn that vicious barrage of elbows at the very end into a highlight, but like, that was not what this fight was for. This fight was for Valentina Shevchenko to fucking style on her on the feet, and she was not going to be in any danger had she done that.
I'm glad you brought that up. I was thinking the same thing and myself during the fight, and thought maybe I was being too harsh, but I was kind of like, maybe she should have just swung with her and not gone for these obviously very intelligent takedowns. Like, I know it was less risky, but I thought Shevchenko probably could have used this fight to show that she's not just about avoiding risk. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at here. Now, I'm not going to find flaws with this performance in that regard. Like, it was more or less a perfect performance.
Sure.
And what we saw from Shevchenko on the feet also, what we saw from Shevchenko on the feet, I thought was promising in the first bit here, because she was willing to work at a pace. What we've seen from Shevchenko in the past, especially early on, is her just kind of feeling things out and feeling things out and feeling things out. She was willing to throw volume early in this fight. That stood out to me a very great deal. And I don't, maybe moving down in weight, not being kind of outsized by everybody, not giving up so much size means she's in range a little bit more, means she can throw a little bit more volume. We've seen that from fighters before. As they move down in weight, the volume will increase because the range is less of a problem for them. So, like, I think we've seen that from Frankie Edgar a little. We saw that in kind of Frankie Edgar's mid featherweight career before he got old, before he got older. So that could be a piece of it. But I sincerely hope that at least that point we stick on to. But man, I don't understand how you don't stop this fight earlier.
Yeah. I mean, what's the point, right? Everybody fucking shit the bed in this fight. Everyone, and Valentina Shevchenko, the only reason it feels like there's no case to maybe critique her approach. There's no case to say, hey, it wasn't really risky to be on the feet anyway, and maybe you should have just stopped. I mean, honestly, I will say that might have been kinder, because she might have knocked Cachoeira out and saved her some of that punishment. But Cachoeira's corner heard she had a torn ACL. She was like, hey, I fucked up my knee. And they're like, don't worry about it, keep going. And Mario Yamasaki watched her get hit like 1,000 times and was like, hey, don't worry about it, keep on going. And, yeah, no one cared. I don't know. I don't understand that. It did make me feel pretty bad for a fight that was just intended to make Valentina Shevchenko look good. It kind of soured the moment from my perspective. What else from this card do we want to talk about? Pat, I realize we haven't actually fully planned what we're going to discuss here. What else stood out to you?
Not a whole lot, if we're being real honest about it. I thought that we pretty much hit the
key points.
Yeah, I think we hit pretty much everything that we needed to hit from this. Let me run over the card one more time.
I got a few little gems to drop. I'll say more evidence that you absolutely should be following the career of flyweight Davison Figueiredo, who
he was that was very slick.
It's like 125-pound Yoel Romero, where he just like, it's very difficult to get a beat on what his style is, but he hits really hard and surprises people all the time. So he's a lot of fun. And I would also like to talk a little bit about Marlon Vera, who fought Douglas De Silva de Andrade. Had a very difficult time, Marlon Vera, and I do wonder. I wonder whether, he's made steady improvements, has looked like he has a better grasp on just the totality of how to be an MMA fighter, how not to fight off of your back for extended periods of time, how to use the fence to your advantage, how to push the pace, how to use your reach. These are things he's learned quite clearly since joining Team Oyama, that there's been a sharp contrast from his time just training in Ecuador. But I do wonder, does he need a boxing coach? Does he need... is it a problem? The problem he had in this fight was he just couldn't turn up the pace as the fight went on like he usually does, because he was getting countered and tagged. And De Silva is a very good management of distance and was just stinging him right on the end of his punches over and over and putting them together and forcing Vera to back up. For Vera, is that a problem of preparation, I wonder? Does it mean that he doesn't have a system of responses for these kinds of things, and so you can shut his game down by just mixing up your pot shots? Or is it a problem of execution? Is there something inherently wrong with Marlon Vera that hampers his ability to get going? Because we know he's a slow starter. I know that Colin Oyama spends every single one of Chito Vera's fights screaming at him as the fight goes on to pick up the pace. So is he just like Donald Cerrone in a bantamweight's body, or does he need better skill training? I don't know, but I'm interested in Chito Vera as a developing fighter. I think he's a lot of fun. I think he's got an interesting personality, and it felt like he took a small step backwards in this fight after that strong performance against John Lineker. So I'll be keeping my eye on that.
Can we talk about Tim Means real quick?
Oh, sure. Yeah, what do you have to say about Tim Means?
He looked real good, and he got robbed, man.
Yeah, this one I felt was a
genuine robbery.
A much more of a robbery than the main event. I didn't find the main event to be really egregious. I did not think that Sergio Moraes won the last two rounds against Tim Means.
I think you could make a good argument that Tim Means won the first round too.
First round was close. Yeah, I understand Moraes getting that first round because he came out so aggressive, threw lots of combinations, and got visible reactions out of Tim Means.
And more of Means' work was to the legs and the body in that round, even though he landed more. I get it. But I thought Means pretty clearly won that fight.
With that lovely Tim Means style, where just he just sliding in little pokes, little prods in between the big loaded up swings of Sergio Moraes. And last week, I think Zane critiqued Tim Means' shoulder rolling, his style of defense. I want to point out that Tim Means has probably the second best shoulder roll in MMA after Bobby Green. And I like the fact that we have more MMA fighters willing to use that technique. I like the fact that Tim Means will stick a jab in your face, and when you come back, he doesn't have to get his jab back to his chin to protect himself. He just dips behind the shoulder, absorbs the shot there, and comes back with another counter. I really like the way all the pieces of Tim Means' technical striking game fit together. How fluid he is, how natural it all is to him to just put this after that. Everything's in its place. And I thought he deserved the win too. So sorry, Tim, man. You had another really strong classic Tim Means style performance. But hey, Zane will be happy about Sergio Moraes. Fucking asshole. All right, well, that about does it for this episode of Heavy Hands. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We're sorry if you really did get excited about the idea of it being about football now, but it turns out it's about fights again. I've been Connor Ruebusch. Joining me has been Patrick Wyman. Find us both on social media if you so desire. We are both on Twitter. Pat is at Patrick_Wyman, and I am at Boxing Bush. That's BUSCH. You can also find us both on Facebook.com/either Patrick Wyman MMA or Connor Ruebusch MMA. I will let you sort out the fine details of spelling. And before we wrap up for good, Pat, what do you have coming out this week?
I have a couple of things coming out this week. I have an article on Deadspin about the kind of upcoming shitty stretch that the UFC is going to be on here. So I wrote that piece about, just how and why we've ended up at this point, because there are broader implications for this about the UFC's next TV contract, about what this sport actually is. And the basic question seems to me to be at this point, why bother watching? What are you getting out of watching this? What does the UFC think it's selling, and what are we as viewers, what are we buying? I don't think the UFC has done a very good job of telling us why we should be buying this.
Anything else?
I also have a Tides of History episode coming out this week on did the Roman Empire actually fall?
Nice.
Kind of the alternative ways of looking at this that don't necessarily involve a fall.
Somehow the fall of the Roman Empire less depressing than the fall of the UFC in this moment in time. I guess we've had time to get used to the fall of Rome. It's old news now. All right, I think we are just about done here. And we thank all of you for joining us and listening to us prattle on and on about fights that we keep telling you don't really have a whole lot of reasons to care about. But we really, really enjoy the fact that you still come here to spend your time with us. So thank you all. Again, find us on social media for your questions, concerns, or comments. Check out the Heavy Hands Patreon. $3 a month gets you access to 2 or more bonus episodes every month. And there's all kinds of other rewards over there, so go check that out. And until next time, if you guys came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.